Hey everyone, it's me. And today we're going to be talking about the most important things that I have learned from reading How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. This is the second time that I've read this book. It was recommended to me by one of my best friends when I was around 18 years old, and I read it maybe once every 2 or 3 years. There are so many nuggets in this book. So many pieces of advice that really have helped me get where I am today. So I'm really excited to share these with you guys. The main takeaway from this book is that pretty much all of the problems that we have in our relationships and in our lives stem from a failure to properly treat other people. All of the tips and tricks and ideas that are presented in this book can be boiled down to simply showing respect to other people and treating them well. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the most impactful things that I have learned from reading this book. The very first chapter is called Don't Criticize, Condemn, or Complain. And this whole chapter is essentially just about putting yourself in other people's shoes and seeking to understand their perspective before jumping to any conclusions or criticisms. He says that when we're young, we are told that we should always be neat and clean, and he gives the example of his son coming home dirty after playing baseball and then not wanting to go clean up because his father had just criticized him for being dirty. And if the father had done this too many times, his son might have started to believe that it wasn't worth it to even try to be clean. And I think this idea of beating someone down with criticism can really diminish their motivation to improve themselves. So what he suggests is that we try to see things from the other person's perspective, understand why they did what they did, and acknowledge the good things that they do. I know that this sounds kind of touchy-feely and not businesslike, but if you want to build meaningful relationships and really connect with other people, then I highly recommend that you check out this idea of understanding where they're coming from before you start making any criticisms. Next, we have the chapter titled, Give Honest and Sincere Appreciation. This is something that I struggle with quite a bit because I tend to be quite sarcastic, but I know that sarcasm comes off as insincere. And what he says in this chapter is that if you want to win friends, you need to be sincere. One thing that he recommends is that you remember people's names because he says that this is the sweetest sound to people. If you make an effort to remember someone's name and you actually use it while you're talking to them, then they will feel so appreciated and acknowledged. So, I'm going to make an effort to do this the next time that I meet someone new. Also, he recommends that we try to give people a sincere compliment whenever we meet them. And you don't have to spend a lot of time doing this. Just a quick, I really like your hair, or I love that color on you, goes a long way. When I used to work retail, I would always try to give my customers at least one compliment when they came in because I knew that it made their day. The next chapter is titled, Arouse in the Other Person an Eager Want. And the main takeaway from this chapter is that if you want to convince someone to do something, then you need to appeal to their desires. He tells the story of a man named John Henry who was hired to dig a ditch, and John Henry kept thinking to himself, what's in it for me? And he wasn't motivated until his boss appealed to his desire for recognition. His boss said, You know, John Henry, you're the best digger that I've ever seen. You're really helping us out by digging this ditch. And suddenly he was motivated and wanted to do a great job. And the takeaway from this is that if you want to motivate someone, you need to help them see how what they're doing benefits them personally. So I thought this was a good reminder because sometimes I forget to acknowledge how my actions benefit me personally. For example, when I was studying for the bar exam, there were days when I really didn't feel like studying, but I would remind myself that this was an investment in my future self and that I would thank me later. And sure enough, I did end up thanking myself later because having that law degree opened up so many opportunities for me. So I guess my advice here is to try to find ways to help the people around you see how what they're doing benefits them personally. Okay, Now we have the chapter called Become Genuinely Interested in Other People. And he talks about how we naturally gravitate towards people who are genuinely interested in us because we like knowing that there is someone out there who likes us. And he recommends that we ask people questions about themselves and their interests because that shows that we care about them. And also, when we're asking questions, we should be listening intently to what they're saying, not just waiting for our turn to talk again. And he says that this is the fundamental way to win friends, because people love to talk about themselves. So I thought this was a good reminder, because I can sometimes get carried away talking about my own interests and forget to ask the other person any questions. So I'm going to try to remember to ask more questions and listen intently to what they have to say. The next chapter is titled, Let the Other Person Do a Great Deal of the Talking. And this ties in with what I just said in the previous chapter about asking questions and listening intently to the other person. Because what he says in this chapter is that the way that we feel about ourselves depends on how much we get to talk about our own ideas and how much we get to share about ourselves. And he gives the example of a woman who was interviewing him for a magazine article. And she asked him so many questions about his life and his ideas that he ended up feeling energized and inspired afterwards. And she only ended up using about 5 of his answers in the article. But he still felt great about himself afterwards because he got to talk about what he loved. So if you want to make other people feel good about themselves, then let them do a lot of the talking. The next chapter is titled, If You Are Wrong, Admit It Quickly and Emphatically. This is something that I try to practice in my own life because I know that it makes me feel good when someone apologizes to me. And what he says in this chapter is that we all make mistakes, but the way that we handle those mistakes is what matters. So when you realize that you're wrong, you need to apologize quickly and sincerely. And I've definitely noticed that when someone apologizes to me quickly and sincerely, I'm much more likely to forgive them than someone who tries to make excuses or blame someone else. So I guess my advice here is that if you ever realize that you're wrong, just own up to it quickly and sincerely, and then move on. And that brings us to the last chapter that I want to talk about today, which is titled, Be a Good Listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. This goes back to what we talked about earlier about putting yourself in other people's shoes and acknowledging the good things that they do. Because what he says in this chapter is that one of the most powerful ways to connect with someone is to simply listen to them and acknowledge what they're saying. We all want to feel heard and validated, and the best way to do that is to simply listen to the other person and acknowledge what they're saying. And he gives the example of a mother who was complaining about her daughter's bad attitude, and he asked her, "When was the last time that you sat down and talked to her about what's going on?" And she realized that she hadn't done that. She had been so focused on her daughter's bad attitude that she hadn't taken the time to understand why her daughter was acting that way. So I thought this was a good reminder that if someone around you is acting in a way that bothers you, then take the time to understand why they're acting that way before you jump to any conclusions. So that's it for today's video. I hope that you enjoyed these key takeaways from how to win friends and influence people. If you have any thoughts or comments, please leave them below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.